Hello, and welcome back to YouTube for Healthy Adolescent Development. My name is Kaylee Cornelison. Pronouns are she, her, and I'm a trainer, facilitator, and social worker coming to you with strategies and supports for teens and young adults. This is for parents and caregivers as well as youth serving professionals. I want to talk today a little bit about how to support LGBTQ plus youth. So we're going into June, which is obviously Pride Month. And I've done some posts before about small strategies that we can use to support LGBTQ plus young people. And I think we're at a point in time where we need to go beyond small strategies. We are in a time where young people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, intersex, pansexual, non-binary, all of the young people under our LGBTQ plus umbrella really need our support. It's a scary time for them, for us, and now's the time for us as adults, as their parents, as their educators, as their social workers, as anyone who cares about young people, whether or not we think we know an LGBTQ plus young person. Now's our time to really step up and let our support be seen and heard by them and by all the other people around us, adults and young people included. So I'm going to talk today about 5 steps that go beyond rainbow flags to support LGBTQ plus youth. So the first thing that I think is so important is to truly understand what's going on in our current political climate and how it impacts LGBTQ plus youth, and really all youth, but we're going to focus on LGBTQ plus young people. There are a variety of laws that are in place, that are being attempted to be put into place, as well as policies that are really having a big impact on LGBTQ plus young people today. So first of all, bans on gender affirming care. So gender affirming care is really any type of medical, mental, surgical support that is provided to people whose gender identity does not match their biological sex. So trans folks, non-binary folks, it's support to help those folks feel more aligned with their gender identity and their body. And a lot of times for young people, this means things like hormone blockers as they begin to enter puberty, but it could really be a wide spectrum of different types of supports that they receive from mental and medical health providers. There are huge attacks on gender affirming care bans across the country right now. So as of May 2025, 27 states have enacted laws and policies limiting youth to have access to gender affirming care. 40% of trans youth live in a state that has enacted a law or policy that limits access to gender affirming. There are 17 states that are facing lawsuits related to this, but clearly that's not all of them. And we are still in limbo in terms of the status of a lot of those lawsuits. There are also 24 states who impose professional or legal penalties on healthcare providers who are providing minors with gender affirming care. Even if we have those really amazing and courageous healthcare providers who are still trying to provide life-saving care to trans and non-binary youth, they are facing legal and professional penalties if they do provide that care. The next thing that I want to talk about is disregard of pronouns. So as of June 2023, at least 10 states have passed laws that allow teachers specifically to disregard students' requested pronouns or require parental permission for teachers to use the pronouns that match with their gender identity. So that means that if a young person says, hey, my pronouns are she, they, or they, them, or he, him, whatever those pronouns are, that in 10 states, teachers don't have to do anything about that. And there are other states where they are allowed to out that young person to their family, who they don't know if they're supportive or not. And that can be really dangerous. So teachers, staff, classmates aren't required to use students' pronouns or name if they don't align with the student's sex assigned at birth. In at least 6 of these 10 states, teachers and administrators are also required to tell parents if the young person requests to use different name or pronouns. And it's really scary and sad that spaces where often young people who don't have supportive homes can ask a teacher that they feel is supportive, an administrator that they feel is supportive, some other staff person at school to use the name and pronouns that align with who they are and how they identify. And those folks are being required to out them to their family. For some young people, they have supportive families and that's no problem. But for others, we're taking away a safe space that those young people might otherwise have. And just a little stat around pronoun use, it might seem like a very small thing, but the Trevor Project did a study in 2020 that showed that trans and non-binary youth who report having their pronouns respected by all or most of the people in their lives attempted suicide at half the rate of those who did not have their pronouns respected. That's huge. It's a huge impact to have this just one small thing respected when it comes to supporting trans and non-binary young people. Another piece that we've seen attacks on are restrictions on inclusive curriculum for LGBTQ plus youth. So between 2021 and 2024, 7 states enacted laws that require parental notification of LGBTQ plus inclusive instruction, and parents are allowed to either have their child opt in or opt out. 11 states have laws censoring instruction on LGBTQ plus people and topics. And between 2022 and 2024, 8 states have passed don't say gay or trans, so to speak, laws that prohibit instruction on sexual orientation, gender identity, and these include total bans and some partial grade-specific bans. Finally, 2 states have laws that expressly restrict access to LGBTQ plus inclusive school library books and resources. So we're not even allowed to be represented in books in those 2 states in the school libraries. 15 states also have laws censoring instruction on race and sex-based structural inequity in K through 12 schools. And so this data is from 2024, and with a lot of the executive orders that are being put in place now, a lot of that is going to continue to shift and be more and more restrictive over time. So not only do we have these laws that have been in place in the past and are being made more and more strict in our current political climate, but there's also a slew of current executive orders since the inauguration in 2025 that can and will impact LGBTQ plus youth. So a short list of things that are happening. First of all, just erasure of LGBTQ plus people by removing data and preventing data from being collected because the government is not allowing folks to ask about gender identity or sexual orientation. There's also loss of funding for programs that address unique health needs of LGBTQ plus people. There's conditional federal funding for schools on whether or not they support transgender students. So of course, this is going to exacerbate existing mental health disparities, continue to enact stigma and discrimination, and reduce that safe space school connectedness young people need. Finally, they're cutting funding to NGOs and to research around LGBTQ plus supportive topics and preventing schools from recognizing trans students' identities. So things like their names and pronoun. I talked a little bit already about some of those laws. So while many of these executive orders are still being fought out in the courts, many states and schools have proactively implemented a lot of these restrictions or used them as an excuse to remove protections for LGBTQ plus youth. So even though there's a lot of legal stuff going on with these executive orders, a lot of entities, states and schools included, have used the existence of the executive orders just in and of themselves to discriminate and remove protections for LGBTQ plus youth. So that's the first strategy, is to really understand as much as you can about what's going on for LGBTQ plus youth with the laws, the policies, just the overall climate of discrimination and fear that LGBTQ plus young people are experiencing at the moment. I will link a variety of sources that have the data that back up everything that I've said here in the accompanying blog post for this video. So the second thing that caring adults can do is to stand up to people who are hateful or simply claim that they don't get it. It's really helpful to know the facts and to make it personal. So when we kind of bring the issue home and say, I have a kid who identifies as queer, or I have a friend's kid who is trans, or my nephew, my cousin, my aunt or uncle, bringing it home can have the biggest impact for people who claim that they don't get it, they're going to stay out of this topic. Bring them in. I think it's Brene Brown who has a quote that says, people are hard to hate up close. We need to move in. And while that's really hard to do and it can be easier to continue to separate ourselves, if we're trying to be a good advocate and ally for young people who have less power and less autonomy and less say in the world as a whole, it's our job as those caring adults to step forward and use our voice and our privilege to talk to other adults to try to help them understand what's at stake here. So knowing the facts and making it personal. There is a wonderful study that was done by the Trevor Project, and I'll again link that. This is the state of mental health of LGBTQ plus young people in 2024. It's a national survey. And they found that nearly half of LGBTQ plus young people experienced bullying in the past year. And those who experienced bullying also reported significantly higher rates of attempting suicide in the past year. 39% of LGBTQ plus young people seriously considered attempting suicide, and that includes 46% of trans and non-binary youth, and youth of color had even higher rates than white youth did. More than 1 in 10 LGBTQ plus young people attempted suicide in the past year, was about 12%, and 90% of LGBTQ plus young people said their well-being was negatively impacted due to recent politics. So that was a survey done in 2024. And what the Trevor Project found in early 2025 was that on January 20th, Inauguration Day, they saw a 33% increase in volume on their crisis line for LGBTQ plus youth compared to rates in the previous week. And on January 21st, the day after the inauguration, they saw a 46% increase in volume compared to the weeks prior. So they're seeing a really significant increase in calls and texts to their crisis lines directly related to the 2025 presidential inauguration. So when folks say, how is this really impacting youth? Now you have a little bit of information from this survey, from the mental health survey, and from a lot of the policies and laws that are being enacted or will maybe be enacted in the future, and how that's directly trickling down to the young people in our lives. So I don't say this to scare folks. I know that sometimes the statistics on bullying and suicide and depression and anxiety is really disturbing and hard for caring adults to hear. And there is good news. There's more things that we can do once we're equipped with all of this information. So first is to advocate. We need to have our voices heard as the adults who care about these young people. So that might look like calling your federal representatives, your Senate and House representatives. You can also advocate at the state level, finding out what's going on in your state legislature, because a lot of these laws and restrictions are going to be coming in at that state level. And then advocating locally. I think when we are feeling the impacts of the chaos at the federal level, we can forget how important the local community and local schools in particular, what a big impact it can have in the policies that they're putting in place. So going to school board meetings, if you have kids in school, talking to principals and superintendents, if you work in a school or community-based setting, rallying the people who are on this same side to impress upon the schools and the local governments about how important it is at this time in particular to support LGBTQ plus youth. There's lots of wonderful resources out there on some talking points and things to say and do. And that's a really, really good place to start. Another thing to do is, if you can, put your money where your values are. So there's been a lot of talk about boycotting different organizations or different companies. That's great. And also, nonprofits who support LGBTQ plus youth are losing grant funding at an alarming rate. Money that has been coming to them from the federal government programs and money that has trickled down to bigger nonprofits that then fund smaller nonprofits, they're in a bad place right now. I have friends and colleagues in every sector who are cutting jobs and cutting programs, cutting research because they do not have the funds to support it any longer with the federal budget changes and budget cuts. So if you are able, not everyone is, to donate to your local, even a local organization, that's going to make a huge impact. You can also donate to larger organizations who work on a national level. You can volunteer for those organizations. Things like the Trevor Hotline have volunteer opportunities if financial contributions aren't something that you can do right now. And then finally, it is so important to understand what a huge impact you can make just by being vocally supportive of LGBTQ plus young people. So from the same national survey on LGBTQ plus youth mental health, they found that having at least just one accepting adult can reduce the risk of a suicide attempt by 40%. Just one caring adult. That is me, that is you, whoever you are to that young person. Being vocally supportive is life-saving. Transgender and non-binary youth who reported gender identity acceptance from adults and peers also had lower odds of attempting suicide in the last year. LGBTQ plus youth who felt high social support from their family reported attempting suicide at less than half the rate of those who felt low or moderate social support. So thinking about families, that's such a key part of a young person's life. Especially most young people live in their family's home. Giving them support from that family angle is key. So if you're a member of that family, parent, caregiver, aunt or uncle, cousin, grandparent, whoever that is, be vocal and step in if you know that there's some other family members who aren't supportive or who don't get it, quote unquote. Try to bring them in and help them understand. LGBTQ plus youth who reported living in very accepting communities also attempted suicide at half the rate that those who reported living in very unaccepting communities. So even if we're not a direct family member of an LGBTQ plus youth, being a part of a wider community makes a difference. So if you're a small business owner, if you're someone who is known at the local coffee shop, if you are someone who walks around town or has a home in a community, think about the small things you can do to signal to LGBTQ plus youth that you're supportive of them. It really does make a difference. And finally, again, from the same survey on the mental health of LGBTQ plus young people, youth on the survey reported ways that people in their lives can best show their support. And it's telling to me how simple these 5 things are. So first and foremost, number 1 was trusting that I know who I am. Let's believe young people that they know who they are, that they're telling us who they are, is a privilege because they feel just safe enough to tell us who they are. And trusting them, even if that identity changes over time, that's okay. They're young people, they're figuring it out. We're all figuring out who we are. But trusting that in the moment that they know who they are is so, so important. The second thing was standing up for them. Young people know. They know if you are sort of talking good about them behind their back and telling other people, hey, their pronouns are this, or they go by this name, or trans kids just aren't confused. They know who they are. We should trust them. We should believe them. We should support them. They know when we're doing things like that. The third thing was not supporting politicians that advocate for anti-LGBTQ plus legislation. Pretty simple. I don't think I need to say more about that. The fourth thing was looking up things about LGBTQ plus identities on their own to better understand. So watching a video like this, that is something that you can do that young people really appreciate. And the fifth thing was respecting my pronouns. So all 5 of these strategies are so simple and straightforward. I understand that they might not always feel easy to do, but they are simple. And it's up to us to step up, have the courage, use our voices and the power that we have as adults to advocate for these young people who really need our support. The final thing that I will say is that I talked a lot about the challenges that young people have, the negative climate that they're experiencing. And I also want to recognize that LGBTQ plus youth and LGBTQ plus people in general are incredibly resilient. We do spend a lot of time talking about bullying and suicide rates and risk for mental health challenges, which is important. And we want to remember that young people find ways. They find chosen family. They find a friend's parent that they can talk to. They find that one teacher who they think might understand them. And as LGBTQ plus people, we've been doing this for hundreds of years because we've always been here. And we've been finding ways to care for ourselves and be in community with other people to create a safe space. And so I want to just recognize the both and of how these LGBTQ plus young people show up in the world.